What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be going through my Week 9 top 36 wide receivers for fantasy football as we head into the weekend. Now, that being said, if you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure you are subscribed. That way, you don't miss the running back version of this episode when it does come out. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these wide receivers. So last week we did this video a little bit differently. We went through each group of players in each tier rather than going one by one. I'm going to do that again this week. If you guys like this type of format, make sure to let me know in the comments. I'm open to any and all feedback. If you want to go back to talking about every individual player, let me know as well. I just figured I would try it. I didn't see any difference in the analytics, but with that little disclaimer being out of the way, let's just hop right into tier 1. And you'll see tier 1 for me is the elite wide receiver ones here in week 9. Coming in this tier, I do have AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tyreek Hill. All of these players are the elite wide receiver ones, at least for me here in week 9. There's a couple matchups I think that are definitely worth talking about. AJ Brown gets a good matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are currently ranked 29th against the wide receiver position, giving up 33.2 fantasy points per game. It should be a very good matchup for AJ Brown, and that is why I've bumped him to the top of this tier as my number 1 wide receiver here this week. He is going to have a very, very good game, or at least it looks like he should, based off of the projections in the matchup on paper. Now, there's a couple other guys in this elite tier where they do have some tougher matchups. I don't think it's enough to really worry about them. These are the elite guys. We shouldn't be thinking too much about these guys. But Jamar Chase, he has a little bit of a tougher matchup. He gets the 8th best wide receiver matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. I know you hear the Las Vegas Raiders and you don't think that they're that good of a defense. They are 8th best against the wide receiver position, only giving up 23.3 fantasy points per game. So definitely a little bit of a tougher matchup on paper, but we're not too worried about that either. And Tyreek Hill, he gets a little bit of a tougher matchup this week against the Buffalo Bills on the road there in Buffalo. Currently the 6th best, only giving up 22.5, but Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill, and Tua back in the lineup should mean a big week regardless of if the matchup is going to be tough or not. Now moving on to my tier 2, I do have these as the high-end wide receiver ones. I got 5 guys in this tier, so it'll take us from wide receiver 7 all the way through wide receiver 11. Coming in at 7, I got Drake London, followed by Malik Nabers, Kupp, Terry McLaurin, and Puka Nacua. So we get both of those Rams wide receivers here in this tier. I don't think that there's any solid matchups like that are going to be very good or very bad matchups. So all of these guys pretty much have neutral games. I think right now, if you're looking at this type of tier, we did see the reemergence of Kupp and Puka Nacua last week. Kupp didn't have a huge week. He did score the touchdown. Puka obviously had a good week. Both of these guys were on limited snap counts. I think the ceiling is still going to be very high for these guys. And people are going to look at Terry McLaurin and say he kind of feels like the odd man out. He shouldn't be. He has been very, very good for fantasy football teams over the last couple of weeks. If you feel like he's the odd man out, you haven't been paying attention. He is a wide receiver 1 for us currently in fantasy football. So feel free to fire all of those guys up as such. And now moving on to my tier 3. My tier 3 is the low-end wide receiver ones, and we only got 3 wide receivers in this tier before we reach the cutoff. I got Devonta Smith, Jayden Reed, and Chris Olave. Now, definitely some things to talk about here. There are some good matchups for both Devonta Smith and Jayden Reed. Devonta Smith, he gets a matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are 29th against the wide receiver position. We kind of talked about that with AJ Brown. The same thing's going to apply for Devonta Smith. Jayden Reed, he gets a matchup against the Detroit Lions, and yes, they have been a good defense, but they are currently ranked 30th against the fantasy football wide receiver position, so they're giving up 34.8 fantasy points per game. There's a chance that Jayden Reed has a big day. This offense is very boom bust, and I think that there's also a chance that Jordan Love does not play in this matchup. Now, if Jordan Love does not play, we will pull him down these rankings. He does not deserve to be that high if they do not have the starting quarterback in the lineup, but until we get that notice, until we get the news that he will not play, I'm going to rank him as if he is playing. So Jayden Reed, he still falls into this top 13. And then when it comes to Chris Olave, so far the news that we've gotten is that Derek Carr is going to be back at practice this week. That is the plan at least. And if Derek Carr is under center for the New Orleans Saints, I think Chris Olave deserves to be a low-end wide receiver 1, especially in a matchup against the Carolina Panthers. So that's going to take us over to our tier 4. Our tier 4 is going to be those high-end wide receiver 2s. I got 5 wide receivers in this tier as well. We got Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson, DJ Moore, Devonta Adams, and Marvin Harrison Jr. This rounds out that tier 4 for me. Now, both of those Jets wide receivers find themselves into this tier for me. I do think Garrett Wilson so far has proven to be the guy that is a little bit more productive for fantasy football. Obviously, Adams is Rodgers' guy, but it does seem like the addition of Adams has opened up Garrett Wilson. Now, when it comes to matchups, there aren't really any good or bad matchups, I would say, for this grouping other than Zay Flowers. Now, Zay Flowers, he gets a matchup against the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos, even though they may not be a great football team in real life, they have been very, very good against wide receivers. Obviously, we can contribute a lot of that to cornerback Pat Surtain. Now, Pat Surtain and the Broncos secondary, they are first against the wide receiver position, only giving up 20.8 fantasy points per game. And you also got to think about the fact that Diontae Johnson has been added to this team now. There was a trade that happened today. So Zay Flowers, he gets Diontae Johnson. Although we don't know if Diontae is going to be playing here on Sunday for the Baltimore Ravens, there is a chance that he does. And if he does, maybe it takes just a tiny bit away from Zay Flowers in an offense that already wants to just establish the run with Derrick Henry. So it's worth noting that. But Zay Flowers, he still finds his way in my top 15 this week. Now, going to my tier 5, I got quite a few players in this tier. I think 8 of them total. This is the low end wide receiver 2s. And so we'll start at 20. We'll work our way all the way to 27, starting with Brian Thomas Jr., Josh Downs, Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, Tank Dell, Jalen Waddle, Darnell Mooney, and Michael Pittman Jr. So definitely a lot to talk about in this tier. We have 2 of the Buffalo Bills wide receivers. We have 2 of the Indianapolis Colts wide receivers, and there is going to be some change here in Indianapolis. So for the Colts wide receivers, it is going to be Joe Flacco under center. That's obviously better for the receiving options in this offense. So Josh Downs, he got a bump in the rankings. Michael Pittman gets a bump in the rankings. And I think Josh Downs, when he's been on the field, he has outproduced Michael Pittman this year. So that's why he gets the edge over Michael Pittman in my rankings. Now, Khalil Shakir and Amari Cooper, kind of similar to what Devonta Adams and Garrett Wilson have done. It seems like the veteran addition has opened up the other younger guy. I think that's kind of what's happening with Khalil Shakir and Amari Cooper. They're going to get Amari Cooper more involved over the weeks, obviously. But Khalil Shakir, he is going to be as good of a play as anybody. But when it comes to the matchups this week, there is quite a few things to talk about. As far as the easier matchups go, those Colts wide receivers, they get that Minnesota Vikings defense that is ranked 32nd against the wide receiver position, giving up 39.9 fantasy points per game. So the Vikings defense, it hasn't been the same over the last couple weeks. It also hasn't just been good against wide receivers. So there's going to be lots of opportunities for Downs and Pittman to score. There are some tough matchups. Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, they get a tough matchup against Miami, who's currently ranked 4th against the wide receiver position. And then you get Tank Dell against the Jets, 3rd against the wide receiver position, and Jalen Waddle against the Buffalo Bills, which is 6th against the wide receiver position. So all of these guys, Shakir, Cooper, Dell, Waddle, they have some tougher matchups this week just to keep an eye on. And then the one thing that we should also mention about Brian Thomas Jr., he is questionable with a chest injury. That is why he is down here. If Brian Thomas Jr. is healthy, he is going to move up my rankings just a little bit, probably into that next high-end wide receiver 2 tier as we approach the weekend. Now, 2 more tiers to get through. We'll go into tier 6, the high-end wide receiver 3s. I only got 4 guys in this tier. We'll talk about Courtland Sutton, Ladd McConkey, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Calvin Ridley. That rounds out that tier for me. Lots of good matchups in this tier. Sutton gets an easy matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, who are currently ranked 31st against the wide receiver position. McConkey gets a good matchup against Cleveland, who's currently ranked 28th against the wide receiver position. And Calvin Ridley gets a good matchup against New England, that's currently ranked 25th against the wide receiver position. So lots of opportunity from these guys. Maybe not the best offenses, with obviously the Chargers not wanting to pass the football a lot, the Denver Broncos, Mason Rudolph, or Will Levis-led Tennessee Titans. These aren't the greatest offenses, but these guys are getting targets. At least that's what it looks like moving forward. JSN, he's just JSN. I don't know what to say about him at this point. Seems like he's more so just a high-end wide receiver 3 pretty much permanently. Sorry about it, JSN, but that just seems like that's what you are. But overall, lots of good matchups to target here in this tier. Now, moving on to my last tier, this is going to be the low-end wide receiver 3s. I got Xavier Worthy, Cedric Tillman, Keon Coleman, DeAndre Hopkins, and Romeo Doubs. That's going to round out the top 36 for me. We could talk about all of these matchups. There's an easy matchup for Xavier Worthy this week against the 27th ranked Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary when it comes to the wide receiver position. Also, the same thing can be said for DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, both of those guys being on the Kansas City Chiefs. They have mentioned that DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a little bit more involved this week. Now, Romeo Doubs, he gets that 30th ranked Detroit defense, as we talked about earlier with Jayden Reed. And then when it comes to tougher matchups in this tier, Cedric Tillman, he gets the Los Angeles Chargers. He's kind of been a waiver wire wonder, a breakout ever since Amari Cooper has left town, and now Jameis Winston under center. I think Tillman is going to be a fine play It is a tough matchup though, so maybe temper the expectations, and then they are on bye next week, but they get the second best defense. 21.1 fantasy points per game is what they've been giving up. Cedric Tillman comes in as my wide receiver 33, and then Keon Coleman, he's kind of emerging as well. We talked about Amari Cooper maybe helping the younger guy emerge. Keon Coleman fits that bill as well, but this is a tough matchup against Miami. There could be a lot of points, so still worth playing him this week, in my opinion, as a wide receiver 3, maybe a flex play, but Keon Coleman is my wide receiver 34, and as you see, that rounds out my top 36 wide receivers here in week 9. All right, folks, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you go and hit that like button for me. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you are subscribed to our channel. That way you don't miss any future content, and make sure you are a member of our Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, and like I said, free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. With all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you in our next episode. But until then, peace out.